Much for being here. I know how busy each and every one of you is, so it's particularly grateful for it. There is a boy crisis in America. It's time for us to discuss it and recognize it and take action on it. And we need to do that on Staten Island as we are convincing the federal government to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. That is the lead. I don't want to bury it. I want to make sure that is up front. That is why we are here today, and that is why I am so pleased to have Dr. Warren Farrell here on Staten Island with us, the author of this book that I read a few weeks ago, The Boy Crisis, that has had such an impact on me. I want to take a minute. It's probably going to be longer than a minute, but take a minute to explain to you how we got to this moment. And it's not a minute, it really is 27 years, because this is sort of the crossroads, the continuation, the culmination of what I think has been 27 years of work in public service of both our council team and our Borough Hall team. If you look at the common denominator throughout that work, it's been about young people. Last night we had our Readers Are Leaders program. It was absolutely fantastic. The 23rd year of challenging fourth graders to read. 25 billion words have been read in that time, 660,000 books, 110,000 students. Absolutely fantastic. At the end of it, Eddie Burke and I, Deputy Borough President Ed Burke and I, were approached by a woman who was a teacher at New York High School, and she was so gracious in saying how the money that we have allocated to New York High School has impacted lives. And she went out of her way to tell me how real that is. And she told us of a student who went through the virtual enterprise program that we funded at New York High School. And she said, I have a cute line to my students that when you make your first million, you come back and you remember your old teacher. And she got a call from a young student, relatively recent graduate of hers, who said, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm this close. And she said, in pretty good detail, that made my heart, well up with pride, the money that you allocate really does help. Miss Marie Marie LaFrancesca is in the back. She has been with me from day one, and she is our capital budget guru. And between the council tenure and here at Borough Hall, we have allocated $150 million to schools. Now, it wasn't my money, okay? So, and the value of knowing how important education is, the credit doesn't come to me, it goes to my parents, but it shows the priorities that we've had. If you look at our council tenure, we fought up and down for young people. And I'll give you, it's probably not the most prominent, but I'll give you an example of the extremes that we would go to. And I was reminded this week, after losing my good friend, my former colleague, Lou Fidler, who was the chair of the Youth Services Committee, who was my co-sponsor, we fought a $200 million metal bat industry who never, ever, ever lost. They lied from day one. We overcame getting enough votes to pass it. We overcame a mayoral veto from Mayor Bloomberg. They took us to federal court, and they literally made a federal case out of it. And we won, because we knew that kids playing a sport shouldn't be subject to a risk that is more than the inherent risk in sport. It's always been about young people. So when we got to this podium in 2014, and we told the world we're going to live up to the commitment we made campaigning about education and health and wellness, and we went out and we hired Dr. Ginny Montello, and we hired Rose Kerr, and then we hired Laura, and we hired Kelly, and we put this team together. That's why we've been able to focus on the things that we have. You read a book about sleep, we fight for school start times. You read a book about exercise, Spark, Dr. John Ratty, that's why we fight for Spark. If you think about how far we've come from parents crying about how their kids are not getting, with dyslexia, are not getting a proper education in the New York City public schools. We take those crying parents, and you all out there on my team, turn it into Bridge Prep, a charter school exclusively for kids with dyslexia, one of, 2 or 3 in the country. So all of that, and I'm just skimming the top, all of that should leave us not surprised that when I heard a podcast, Kick-Ass News podcast, we'll give them the plug, and Dr. Warren was on it, it's no surprise I was intrigued. And I said, all right, I'm going to buy the book. And I bought the book. And I said, I'll read the book when I'm on vacation in the Cayman Islands. It's my vacation where I'm not going to focus on work. I'm going to read this book. One other thing happened before I got to vacation. We all went to PS 31. Who was with me that day? Miss Marie, Laura, Lexi. We all went to PS 31. Now, PS 31 has some challenges that are unique to Staten Island, but they're not unique to this country. And Mr. Singleton, who was the principal, who we met for the first time, was here in the audience carrying a copy of a book that I bought him. He impressed us so much. He impressed us how he interacts with those kids, and what was even more impressive was how those kids interacted with him. And he told us of a young man, 7 or 8 years old, who was bounced between and among 6, 7, 8 foster homes. And I asked him, can we meet this kid? And eventually later in the day we did. And you watch the interaction that this man has with this child. And at one point he was holding him like this, and he said, go ahead, tell these folks. And he's like, no, don't make me tell them. Tell these folks why I talk to you the way I do and why I do the things I do. And he said, don't make me say it. And the kid said, because you love me. And then I go read this book. And I say, okay, here's the next challenge. This is what we're doing indirectly, somewhat directly. Let's take it head on. So I text message or email Jennifer San Martino, figure out a way to get in contact with this guy. And from the beach, I sent an email to Dr. Warren. And I got a response. And you guys know how frustrated I get with the internet and social media, but sometimes it works, and it's so pure the way it works. And Dr. Warren said, I'm just so happy that you sent this. I'm so happy this book has impacted you. Let's set up a time to talk. And we had a wonderful conversation. He's amazing. I mentioned a few other people of books I've read, and he's like, well, used to play tennis with him, and I consulted with him, and I know him. Alan Alda, Chip Conley, all these wonderful authors that I've read. And he said, and if you read the book, and we have copies for folks, 2 things, Jim, if you want to do good work on this. Would you be willing to create a council on Staten Island, a council on boys and men? And could you help us convince the Trump administration to create a White House Council on Boys and Men? So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Warren, and he's going to tell you in really powerful ways what our young men are enduring today. And then I'm going to circle back to talk about the 2 different councils that we aim to establish. And I will leave you with one sentence, and I got to look at my notes because I can't get this wrong. Boys who hurt us. So this is about boys and men, but this is about girls and women. This is about everybody. And the sooner we get to identifying and working on the ways to help our young boys, they will grow into men who will help other young boys and other men. They will grow into men who don't abuse women. They will grow into men who help lift women. And I can't wait for you who have not read the book to read the book. And I can't wait to get to work really directly on this issue. So I apologize for going on so long, but as you can see, I'm really passionate about it, and I am just so pleased and honored to have Dr. Warren with us today.
have very mixed emotions about Jim's experience on vacation. As somebody who teaches couples communication, I would thoroughly advise to not take the boy crisis on your vacation and call it relaxation. On the other part of my mixed emotions, the very fact that talking to James, it makes it apparent that this is a man who doesn't just read, he translates into action. I just really want us to acknowledge this man who is such a doer. We talked 5 days ago about making this press conference happen, and he said, because I was going to be in town doing this couples communication workshop, and he goes, yep, we'll make it happen. I've got 5 days, really? And look at the extraordinary job that Emil Micah has done, and Stephanie and Alexis and the staff here has done, so let's give them a really big hand. May there be more mistakes like this. I'm going to talk about, first of all, what is there really a boy crisis and some of the evidence for it? And then secondly, what can the Staten Island Council on Boys and Men potentially do as a solution to this? I think the best recognition that we've had of the boy crisis is Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago that one of the two greatest dangers to the future of the American economy is cyber warfare, and number two, the crisis among young males. Now, Jerome Powell only focused on 3 aspects of that crisis among young males. One is boys, young males, being so unmotivated, failure to lunch-oriented, that they weren't looking for work. Number 2, boys being addicted to drugs, like the opioid crisis. As you probably know, boys are twice as likely as girls to die from overdose from opioids. And then number 3, the slow transition that Americans have facilitated in our school systems of helping boys who used to be, who were non-academic boys, used to rely on their muscle. Now they need to rely on their microchip and their mind. And they are doing that much less effectively in this country than in other countries. And in those 3 areas, he felt boys were going to become a predictable crisis for our economic future. But it goes way beyond economics only. And I'm going to sort of give you some of the really hard data on that now. When I did the research for the boy crisis, I was astonished to find that boys' IQs have dropped. That boys' sperm counts have dropped by 50%. That the male life expectancy has gone down 2 years in a row. That's unheard of, because with technology and all the advances in medicine, life expectancies have always gone up and gotten greater and greater. For the first time, boys have gone down, and girls have leveled off, by the way. So it's not that girls have done so much better either. The suicide. When boys and girls are 9 years of age, they commit suicide about equally, very minimally. Between the ages of 10 and 14, boys commit suicide twice as often as girls. Between the ages of 15 and 19, boys commit suicide 4 times as often. And between the ages of 20 and 24, almost 6 times as often as girls. By the time males are in their 80s and above, the suicide differential between men and women, 1,750% more among adult men over 80. If that statistic was in reverse, there would be no way we wouldn't know that. I'll talk about why we don't know that in a minute, but let's look also at mass shootings. We often say, oh, mass shootings are due to mental illness, they're due to access to guns, they're due to family values being bad, TV being bad, and so on. Girls have those same access to the same guns, the same family values, they have similar mental illnesses, and girls are not doing the shootings. It's our sons that are doing the shootings. Prisoners. Look at the prison population. I ran for governor of California some years ago and spoke at a number of prisons and saw that over and over again, 93% of the prisoners were males. Looked at ISIS recruits. The great majority are males. The United Nations just did a study of children in all developed nations, and I looked at the analysis for the study and found out that in 56 of the largest developed nations, our boys were falling behind our daughters in every single academic subject, and almost all these, especially falling behind in the area of reading and writing. And James, of course, has put his fingers on the importance of reading. Reading is the single biggest predictor of success among academic subjects. It isn't the single biggest predictor of success for boys, I'll get to that in a moment, but as far as academic subjects are, it is the single biggest predictor of success. So I started asking myself the question when I first started doing the research, what do developed nations have in common? And I saw what developed nations had in common was when the ability to survive had grown to be effective. So capitalism had been so effective that it helped the ability to survive. But the advantage, the ability to survive, allowed cultures to have permission for two things that they didn't get permission for before. Number one was permission for divorce. And among the people who were divorced, a very high percentage of them had very minimal or no contact with their dad. And it was that percentage, the ones that had minimal or no contact with their dads, that were involved in what I would call the boy crisis. Then I looked at another, but there was another group that did not account for everybody else. Today, in the United States, 40% of children are growing up with minimal or no contact with who? With their dad. They're both by single moms, and oftentimes, so I was finding that in this group, the ones growing up with single moms who had minimal or no contact with dads, what I came to call dad deprived, they were the ones having the problems. So I saw a lot of boys were doing really well. And so we have a group of boys here, but almost always they are from intact families with a lot of father involvement. The ones that were doing poorly were in the categories I just mentioned. So I began to predict this enormous gap in our future between dad-deprived boys and dad-enriched boys. We go into a park, we see dads who are involved, more involved than our fathers were, playing with the children, roughhousing, and so on. And so that's the good news and the bad news. I noticed that I said a moment ago that it was not just, I said children who were dad deprived. So that includes girls as well. And so I want to make it clear that dad deprived girls do badly in most of the 50 different areas that boys do badly in when they're dad deprived. However, the intensity of how badly they do is not as great as it is for boys. The telomeres of boys versus girls who are dad deprived by the age of 9, the telomeres, which is the part of your cell that contains the ability to prevent you dying from cancer or other problems like that predict life expectancy more than any other single thing. The longer your telomeres, the longer your life expectancy. But the age of 9.5, when children were studied, they tried to figure out what led to shorter telomeres that would predict a shorter life expectancy. They couldn't find anything that was statistically significant except one thing: dad deprivation. And that dad deprivation on average caused boys and girls to have an average of 14% shorter telomeres. But when you separated boys from girls, the boys' telomeres of boys who were dad deprived were yet again 40% shorter than their sisters, which is a perfect metaphor for what's happening with the boy crisis. Both children, boys and girls, are hurting from dad deprivation, but the boys are hurting even more intensely. Boys without a role model become hurt boys. They have what I would call a dad void. Remember I mentioned the mass shootings? And I said the mass shootings were mostly by boys? It's not just that they were mostly by boys. More than 90% of the mass shooters are dad-deprived boys. Number two, remember I mentioned the prisoners? I mentioned my going around to the different prisons and asking about them. It was not only that they're 93% males, it's also that they were more than 90% of the prisoners are dad-deprived males. Remember I talked about ISIS recruits being mostly males? Not only are the males who are ISIS recruits dad-deprived, more than 90% also, but the women who are ISIS recruits are mostly dad-deprived, much smaller percentage of women, but nevertheless. What's happening there? Both the boys and the girls are searching for a sense of purpose, a substitute dad, something bigger than themselves, to channel their testosterone. Remember Hitler Youth? Who did Hitler go after in the youth? It was the dad-deprived boys. We've known about the price of dad deprivation for a while. We're now just beginning, with your efforts here in Staten Island, to do something about it. If you think about the cost, people may sometimes will say, well, we don't want to expand government because the cost will be too much. There is no better way of reducing the size of government than increasing the involvement of dads. So think about the things I just mentioned. ISIS recruits, prisoners, mass shootings, drug overdose. Think of how many trillions of dollars we're pouring in to preventing that. We're preventing the symptoms. We're shooting at the symptoms, not dealing with the hub. What James and you all are doing today is dealing with the underlying cause that leads to the symptoms that we've been shooting down, as opposed to understanding what's creating the symptoms. The solution to dad deprivation is dad involvement. If the Staten Island Council for Boys and Men can inspire dad involvement, it will be a model for the United States and a model for the world. And so the question becomes like, how do we inspire dads to be involved? And every generation has war. And as they fought that war, we got our sons to die as a definition of masculinity. We said, if you're a real man, you'll serve in this war. So we basically made masculinity the equivalent of risking disposability. But the flip side of that, or the implication of that, is when we tell boys they are needed, they will do anything to fulfill that need. If we reward them with the social bribes of telling you, we'll be proud of you, we'll call you a hero, you'll be a warrior, you'll be respected, you'll be valued by mom, dad, society, and by women, boys are willing to die. But in the future, we need many, many fewer boys in war. We need many fewer boys as sole breadwinners, dying on hazardous jobs because women are sharing more of that burden than they ever have before. The good news is we need fewer boys to die in order to prove themselves a man. The bad news is dying in order to prove yourself a man historically was the way males got their sense of purpose. So the good news is need fewer boys to die. The bad news is there's a purpose void. And when you have a purpose void and a dad void working together, dangerous things happen that I'll explain in a second. Let me just grab a little bit of water here before I dry up. Most dads do not explain to moms what they do that is of value, and moms can't hear what dads don't say. If a dad is an exceptional dad and reads parenting magazines and parenting books, he still doesn't find out what he does uniquely or tends to do uniquely that lead to the children doing so much better. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and we'll look at how these examples lead to the slippery slope of the boy crisis. Okay, so one is roughhousing. So dads will be much more likely to take the kids and throw them on the couch. And maybe there's 3 kids and say, okay, your job is to jump off the couch and jump onto my back and pin me down before I pin the 3 of you together down. Okay, this is a challenge. And we have a older brother, maybe a younger sister, and then another younger brother. And so the 3 of them just jumped down on Dad's back, and Mom is looking at this and saying, oh my God, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor here. And the mom is saying to herself, but don't be controlling. The kids are having fun. Don't spoil their fun. But she's also thinking, it's about a 99% chance, maybe 99.99% chance that somebody's going to end up crying hurt soon. And she's only, though, about 100% likely to be right. And so, but she says, okay, once they have an accident, Dad will learn. Well, they have an accident, and then the kids are crying, and Dad doesn't learn. He has them go back to do more roughhousing. But what is missed, and Dad doesn't deconstruct and explain to the mom, is he says something usually like, okay, sweetie, what you just did there is you put your elbow in your sister's eye. That is not okay. Mm-hmm. And if you do that anymore, we'll stop the roughhousing. There'll be no more roughhousing until tomorrow night. Mm-hmm. And so the kids go, okay, Dad, no problem. And then they go back to doing the roughhousing. But they get excited again. They experience what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire. And under fire, they forget about the rule of not, not being too aggressive with sister and younger brother. And so then Dad stops the process and says, okay, once again, you were too aggressive there. Now we're stopping the roughhousing. Oh, Dad, don't stop the roughhousing. No, we'll obey. Nope. Tomorrow night you have another chance. And so why Dad tries again is because tomorrow night, the kids now have another chance to see whether they'll learn the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive, whether they'll learn to be empathetic to their sister's needs or their younger brother's needs, as opposed to just winning in the roughhousing. So by trying again and having enforced the boundary the night before, when they violated the command to be considerate and empathetic to their sisters and brothers, now the children know when Dad says it, he means it, and they have to deal with whether or not to be rough to their sister or brother and lose the roughhousing or finish all my peas before I get my ice cream. I can't manipulate a better deal with Mom or with Dad to get the ice cream that I really want before I finish the peas. And so that boundary enforcement tends to be one of the gifts of Dad-style parenting. Sometimes it's reversed. The mom is more strict than the dad and more likely to enforce. And it's not about boundary setting, by the way. Both parents set boundaries very similarly. They both say you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. The boundary enforced, and the kids test the boundaries the same way with both parents. The difference is how successfully the child can manipulate getting the ice cream before she or he finishes the peas. And moms tend to move into empathetic mode. We've had a tough day. I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. Okay, sweetie. And then the kids say, here's what I appealed to manipulate a better deal and learn how to be great manipulators, which is good training to be attorneys. But it's not necessarily good training to have empathy and assertiveness. I just played that with the attorneys. Sorry. You're an attorney. Cross that out. So if the dad and so one of the things that I hope that the Staten Island Council for Boys and Men will do is to help dads understand what I talk about in the Boy Crisis book as the 9 significant differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. To help dads be able to lovingly explain to moms what they bring to the family table, but also have what children do best with is not dad-style parenting only or mom-style parenting, but what I call checks and balance parenting. That's when the kids do the best. And to get checks and balance parenting, we have to have a lot of things happening in the family. One is I think part of what the Staten Island Council of Boys and Men can do is to begin to teach families how to have family dinner nights without becoming family dinner nightmares. That once a week, there's a series of rules I have in the second appendix of the Boy Crisis book on how to structure a family dinner night so that the children don't take over, so yet the children feel heard, how each parent feels heard, how no one interrupts each other, how we get rid of electronics. When those family dinner nights are done well, they become a ritual that the children become inspired to be able to share their concerns, their fears, and their feelings without having to worry about keeping things to themselves and withdrawing into video games and porn rather than being able to share and express. I'd like to see us understand with the Staten Island Council on Boys and Men something extremely important that is happening before all of our eyes right now. We are making an historic transition from heroic intelligence to the potential for health intelligence. Historically, heroic intelligence is socialization for a short life, to die as a hero on the battlefield and be called a hero. Health intelligence is socialization for a long life, for physical health, and for emotional intelligence. And the more that women take over doing jobs that earn money, the more they are going to want from boys emotional intelligence. And the more that boys have the opportunity to not have to fight in war, the more we'll have to learn a whole series of things that are our privilege to learn, to be able to express our feelings, to share what's happening with ourselves, to be able to speak up about the problems we have that we were never allowed to have in the past. And it's making this transition from retaining the best of heroic intelligence, that's saying that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but the worst of health, and ignoring the worst of health intelligence was of saying, when the going gets tough, I don't even consider going to a therapist. But both need to be trained to work on. Every generation had its war, as I was mentioning before. We trained each generation to do things that they were needed to do. When there's a dad void and a purpose void, what the children don't learn is the two things that are needed for the future. With dad and a sense of purpose, children can be guided to discover who their unique self is. But if you discover your unique self and you don't have the discipline to accomplish it, you become constantly disappointed and ashamed in yourself. Heroic intelligence taught people how to accomplish things that they needed to do and to overcome some of the fears, the barriers, and to take risks that were not taught with just health intelligence alone. When in the old days, our boys often learned, you're a boy, as a boy you learn to serve. Today we often say, as a child, you deserve. And that transition from serve to deserve is a very dangerous transition for long-term sense of purpose. So I want to just be real clear about what an agenda can be that can be either accepted or rejected by the council. Number one is, I think the single most important thing is having parents be taught to communicate effectively. The reason I do the couples communication workshops is because I find that when there's almost all divorces occur because there's bad communication. The core to the bad communication is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. We are biologically trained to become defensive when we hear criticism because we fear that that critic might be an enemy, and we have to get up our defenses to defend against being killed by the enemy. That's perfectly functional for war, and is completely dysfunctional for our partner's concerns. That leads to divorce, which leads oftentimes to a lack of father involvement, which leads to the boy crisis. So that's the connection, that's the trail. Number two, we need to train all our children with communication skills. there should always be a hashtag #MeToo movement, but there should never be a hashtag #MeToo monologue. There has to be a hashtag #MeToo dialogue. Boys and girls have to hear each other's stories, how they hurt, how they're distanced, and boys have even more lifetime training to not share what's going on inside of them. Girls also have that, but not to even the degree that boys have it. We need to train our sons to become, or facilitate our sons and inspire our sons to become father warriors, to understand the 9 differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, and to engage in checks and balance parenting. We need to be encouraging our sons. I saw on the way in here about joining the Cub Scouts. Cub Scouts have one of the greatest predictions of developing character for our sons. We need to encourage Cub Scout involvement. We need to encourage Boy Scout involvement and Boys Clubs involvement. We need to restore in our schools, we need to restore recess and vocational education. And vocational education, in Japan, vocational education is at the 25% level for 25% of the students. The students that graduate with a vocational education background are 99.6% likely to get jobs when they graduate versus what happens here. We need to make high school sports into required curriculum. Boys do extremely well when they learn how to achieve individually, achieve in teams, and also do something that has become one of the most neglected arts in the United States, is to learn how to participate in pickup team sports, which is excellent preparation for becoming an entrepreneur. But most important, what we need to do in school is to make sure sports are not just varsity sports, that they include every child that goes through school. It is crucial to the curriculum, but it's especially important to boys because boys' brains activate in a receptive to learning way when they are physically engaged. We need to make sure that the faith-based communities are worked with so that the ministers, priests, rabbis, imams can work with their children, not just to hear lectures, but that the faith-based community leaders get other boys at your son's age and share feelings, get the boys to expose what's happening with themselves behind their masks. Because until boys feel secure among peers, they keep masks that prevent them from allowing themselves to be heard and seen. To finish off, the boy crisis is a bipartisan issue. Conservatives have long pleaded as to the importance of family and fathers. Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan, on the other hand, have made it clear that women will never be equal at work until dads are equal at home. Addressing the boy crisis is core to gender liberation, freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for our future. We need both heroic intelligence and health intelligence. Staten Island is often considered one of the most conservative places in New York City. And I think this is a way of thinking about Staten Island as one of the most progressive places. It understands that we're all in the same family boat, that when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. Staten Island, forming the Staten Island Council of Boys and Men, becomes the only government organization in the United States devoted to boys and men's issues. I argue that Staten Island might be called the new progressive. Staten Island understands that the future will not be female unless it is also male. That women who are winners want men who are winners. We want our daughters to have young men who are worthy of their love. Thank you.
So we have copies of the books that we want to get to a few of you folks. I just want to circle back onto, so now what? What are we going to do? We are going to create this Staten Island Council. I'm really, really pleased to be able to say that Senator Diane Savino has agreed to co-chair this effort with me. Those of you who are familiar with me know the depth of my respect for Diane. She's one of the best elected officials in the state. Inter-party, intra-party, BS politics aside, she's smart, she's strong. She happens to have a wealth of experience prior to getting into elective office and social work, and she just brings a lot to the table. And frankly, I think it's important that there's a strong woman who is the face of this with us as we figure out how to identify folks in the Staten Island community who want to step forward and be a part of this. And once we have that council together, we then have to go out and we will be working with Dr. Farrell and his folks to figure out the correct path and to identify, and I think he's identified a bunch of the issues we want to address, but identify the best practices of it and slowly begin to implement them. We are accustomed in this office to taking on big challenges that we know will not be fixed overnight, and we get the scope of this one. But there is work to be done, and there are wins to put on the board quickly and over a long period of time. So we will do that. The ultimate goal is a national one, and that is to do in 2019 what President Barack Obama did in 2009, and that was to create a White House Council on Girls and Women. At that time, the president called up Dr. Farrell and said, could you help us out on an advisory board related to that effort? And he said yes, and he also said what we should be doing simultaneously is creating a council on boys and girls. That has not happened. Some efforts to convince the Trump administration haven't reached fruition. But an interesting thing happened along the way. I reached out to Councilman Joe Borelli, who, if you're a Staten Islander, you know he's as connected to Trump world as anyone. Joe said, as a father of two boys, I'm interested in this effort. So he and I authored a letter a few weeks ago to, interestingly enough, we thought that writing it to another strong woman would be an effective way of moving the ball. And we wrote a letter to Lynn Patton. And then an idea came into my head recently, and in fact, I was wrong when I said to Dr. Farrell, I really don't have any contacts with the Trump administration. I have a really good friend, and I'm not sure why I didn't think of him immediately, and that's Tony Farrell. And Tony is the Region 2 Director at HHS. And just in the last few days, I told Tony about this effort and said, can you take this message back into the Trump administration? Can you see if you could be part of the local effort, and can you be the messenger to the Trump administration to make the case? Let them look at this book, let them look at the data and the science. And Tony is here today, and just this morning said that he talked to the folks up in the administration, and they acknowledged the effort that we're undertaking on Staten Island. Tony has been given the clearance to work with us, and my hope is that now that we sort of established a beachhead within the administration, that in fact they will see the virtue of a White House Council on boys and men, and that will lift, I believe, all boats. So if the day comes when little old Staten Island has instigated the creation of a White House Council on boys and men, that would be a wonderful thing. That would help our local efforts, and that will, I think, lift communities all across this country. So this is just the beginning. It's the first step. When you are John Fusco's protege, and when you're John Oddo's youngest son, you don't do bat flips or victory laps. You're really not. It's really not your makeup. So we don't look back too often. We have 967 days left, in this administration here at Borough Hall. And we are going to make the most of them. And we are going to do, to use some lingo that I learned from a new book, loon shots. We're going to do franchises and loon shots. Franchises are those quality of life issues that Staten Islanders demand, the litter, the streets, everything that we do and we do well. We're also going to take some loon shots. We're going to go with some far-reaching ideas, and I think this is absolutely one of them, and we're committed to chipping away at this. So for those of you, again, I appreciate your patience, your endurance. We welcome you to this effort. If you can help us identify other Staten Islanders who are part of it, that would be great. And thank you for all of the work that you guys already do to address this and so many other issues. But this is a great challenge and one I'm really looking forward to undertaking. Any questions, comments for, yes, sir?
Can you say your name so I can speak with you as a person rather than...
Okay, my name is Albert. Can I stand up?
Sure.
Yeah.
Good morning or good afternoon, family. My name is Al Peters. I'm a community activist, former single parent, edutainer, entrepreneur. Hi, Jan. How you doing? Okay. Friend of the Borough President. First, let me compliment you man to man. You have very good taste in women. I met your wife.
Here's my wife, by the way, Liz. Would you stand up, sweetheart?
There's a couple of things that was mentioned in your presentation that, first I want to say, Borough President, that I hope that this particular initiative is taken very, 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 very seriously. This has been my experience in terms of fathering many young men in my community. Rownell Wilson and Max Wiles. Max Wiles is a movie star. Rownell Wilson unfortunately killed 2 police officers. So the intensity of being surrogate fathers is real for me as an activist. From my cultural experience, not only is the fathers missing, but they have been emasculated by the system. And many different other interruptions in terms of them being able to be fathers in their own household. So my challenge is a tad bit different than somebody else's cultural experience. What I want to do is I want to just deal with me for a moment. When I was a little person, I grew up on the Lower East Side. The Lower East Side, it was a multitude of various different cultural experiences. I had first, just for a point of reference, my father was in the home. We lived in a little more projects. But I also had other fathers. I had an Italian father, I had an Irish father, I had a Puerto Rican father. I even had an Asian father. These were men who took time out and had the word that was missing, and I didn't hear too much here, the courage to mentor. So that means that I was able to get up close and personal with other people's understandings and references of the world, and to teach me levels of cultural sensitivity. So when I was in a particular situation, I didn't necessarily misread it out of ignorance because it was called something else. No, that's not it. You're just not doing the right thing. And this person just happened to be white that's telling you that. So this bringing the father in, and what I've heard is kind of very revolutionary because, see, fathers today are dealing with a lot of different obstacles in their way. And some is even suggesting that they're trying to be feminized now. All right, so with us men, ladies is a guy thing. With us men, there's issues about the masculinity thing and the feminine thing, because none of us who wants to be caught doing the feminine thing because we're masculine. But you're absolutely right. I'm also a feminist, so there needs to be a level of sensitivity in that particular area because I also have a daughter as well. So the challenge to me is that how do I help to sustain that type of presence in the community in which I come from, because it's drastically needed. I'm on the battlefield. So the benign neglect that you're talking about is pervasive in my community and what I deal with. It's not a theoretical situation, it's a reality that I deal with on an ongoing basis. So I welcome this type of initiative. I hope that this initiative lasts beyond the administrations, because it is drastically, definitely needed, and it's needed for the country. But we could start very short by dealing with Staten Island in terms of Staten Island, and particularly with respect to the community in which I come from, because the fathers are grossly needed in our community. And what I discovered when we dealing with our young people, and particularly young men in particular, the word that is omitted a lot out of their experience is the word love. That word love. And that word love was given to me when I was a little guy by my Irish father, my Italian father, my Chinese father, my Latino father, and these other men that was living in the community but took time out to mentor us and to share with us their own personal experiences. So we called them uncle. Okay, that's the respect we call them. And on certain levels, we call them pop. So they did not give birth to us, but we were their children. So it's also a matter of having the courage also to bring back this school of thought in terms of the missing dad, because the missing dad in my community has also been demonized, vilified, and a host of other things. And so as a single parent, and my son now is 42 years old, it was a very interesting challenge. I never demonized his mother. Okay, but I assumed the responsibility, and I'll leave you with this. This is what the old timers said to me when they found out that I was a single parent. They said you wasn't getting no standing ovation. The only thing you was doing was doing your job as a parent. That was it. And they would monitor me every so often. They would call me up and ask me how I was doing. But it was also the women in my community that was very, very much supportive of that too as well. So I say that I welcome this. I would like to be part of this. And again, I hope that this concern and level of sensitivity far sustains beyond the many different administrations, and it's just not a soundbite. And thank you very much for listening.
Let's start with word love here. One of the reasons I call this the boys that will hopefully be training to be wonderful fathers, father warriors, is because in the old days we had to work on the battlefields and be willing to die in order to be heroes. In the future, I think we're going to be needing to train our sons not to kill and be killed, but to love and be loved, and to be able to express that love. And that takes courage, because it takes the type of courage to say, I am the new type of man. Don't you want, men have to confront other men. And also, there's another major player in here. If women were to say tomorrow that we will love and have sex with men who walk on their hands, men would be having hand-walking contests starting tomorrow.
That's right. That's right.
When women, the power that women have is totally not understood in this culture. When women value something, men compete to become what women value.
That's correct.
You need to know your power.
That's right.
And when our daughters begin to marry men who want to be full-time fathers so that the woman can be maybe a top-level executive and know that she has children that are well-raised, that she can come home to a father that is being responsible, she can be happily married, have children that are well-raised, and be successful herself, be in essence a have-it-all woman. The have-it-all woman is very compatible with the certain types of men. Not all men will be cut out for this, but we have to remember that the Pew Research Center, for the first time in history, asked men who were full-time working dads, would you prefer to be working full-time or to be with your children full-time? And those full-time working dads, 49% of them said, I would prefer to be with the children full-time. I just feel I have to produce the money. And so we have an enormous potential to discover individual males who will be our next firefighters and our next soldiers on the one hand, but also our next full-time dads, without shaming them and telling them, what type of man are you, because you're involved full-time with the family. This is the next evolutionary step that Staten Island has the potential for creating.
Al, if I could just respond, I think my first challenge is getting the right people in the room, and the right people means that I'm touching every community. and so that the unique challenges in each community are at the table. And having people who can, have the ability to help me craft the agenda, understand it. So, yeah, I hear a lot of what you're saying. In the back, and then we'll go to Mr. Singleton. Yes,
Can you
please.
say your name?
Hi, I'm Dr. Kim McLaughlin. I'm the Associate Executive Director of UAU, and I cannot contain my enthusiasm about this. And part of the reason is UAU recently got a fatherhood initiative from UICP, which we have renamed Fatherhood Matters. And what we discovered, because we're really working on the North Shore, we're in the NYCHA homes, and we're also in a variety of schools, but what we discovered when we brought the fathers in, they feel completely disconnected. They don't feel that it's there, that they have any value themselves.
That's
So
right.
the fathers that we work with, they say, well, I have no money, so I can't see my kids this week. And we are trying to, it's mind-boggling to refocus that you're important because you're their father. Whether you're empty-handed or down on your
That's
luck,
right.
you're their father.
That's
So
right.
That's just for the Fatherhood Matters program. But because of that, we wanted to branch out, and it really became a holy Toledo, we need to remarket fatherhood. But for every community, because we're in every community board, so depending upon where we're functioning, it's a women's issue, whereby the women across the board have to see the importance of fatherhood and how they need to engage with their co-parent. And because the divorce rate is so very high, 1 out of every 2 children that we service is in this situation. So part of the program, and I would count me in,
Great.
and count the agency in, because what we're doing now is we're doing specific father engagement for after-school programs, so that the fathers alone are interacting with their children. And then we took it the next step, which we were piloting, but we didn't have the money, so we were gonna negotiate some of our other funds to hit our adolescents and our elementary school youth with a curriculum about the importance of fatherhood. So we do our women empowerment, but we want to educate at a very, very young age, why is that the father important? And it's not about bringing the acknowledgement that some of the fathers aren't here, but because you're going to be a father. So we're trying to make small groups of boys in the elementary school. PS 18 is the first one that we're going to try to kick this off with, because they don't see it themselves, and they have to be primed now to know that they're going to be important then. So I would love to speak with you further, know if there's any curriculum that we can use in after-school settings. We do a lot of push-in during the school day. There are so many opportunities, and I just think it's a phenomenal beginning. And because Staten Island is separate and distinct from the other boroughs, those of us who live, when people come in from the outside, they think we're a peculiar group because what happens on the south side, on the North Shore, and everyone knows everyone. But I think we are a very good host, and because a lot of the non-for-profits collaborate nicely, I think a lot can be done with this, and I do think we could be something that's stellar and at least kick off an initiative that would be valuable nationwide.
That's awesome. By the way, if you noticed, my chief of staff is like a shark. So when he's in, sharks are always moving, but when he's in movement, he was sitting there and he looked at Miss Marie. We will talk to you about the curriculum and some other stuff, but that is such a wonderful response. That's exactly what we were looking for. Do you want to respond?
I cannot contain my excitement at the excitement and the intelligence that you put forth, and your ability to see that women's and men's issues work so integrally together. We're all moving forward, and we're all in the same family boat. And I really feel that you feel that, and I'm so glad that James Oddo has somebody like you and yourself to work with Mr. Peters on this.
Doc, that's Mr. Singleton, who I referenced.
Oh, yes.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. I don't know. I'm not in school, I don't know
It's
where. So I'm the principal of PS 31, I was mentioned before. I spend a lot of time, first of all, I'm moved. It moves me to be here today. Like I feel I'm full, because this is work that I engage in every single day with children at my school. You mentioned this is something I do every day. It's not just about teaching them to read and write. This is something that happens every single day. Just trying to teach young boys that they have to be accountable. And this is something I do every day. So thank you so much for writing the book, and also just bringing light to this for us. You said a couple of things. First of all, I've never been more proud of my dad. I wish he was here. I get emotional when I talk about my dad, because I know that if it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't be standing here. I have so many friends that didn't have fathers, and I was one of the few that I knew that had a dad. And my dad is still around, and I still speak to him every day, so I'm very, very proud of my father. One thing that you said that rings into, I'm gonna take it with me, I'm gonna probably put it on a t-shirt. Women want men who are worthy of their love. That is like, that's beautiful. And as soon as you said it, like I just felt full inside. So thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me here. I didn't expect to come here and be moved, but I am, and thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Novakovic from Staten Island University Hospital. I'm Director of Outpatients, and on behalf of our hospital and our CEO, we are very grateful to have you here, as we on a daily basis see, when we take developmental history of our patient, we see all of these issues regularly. We're very excited, and I just spoke with Joanne here, Assistant Director, to initiate very similar program at the Staten Island University Hospital. And I would reach out.
That's wonderful.
And we are expanding our services with the addiction services fellowships and child psychiatry fellowships. We are very active in schools as well. And on behalf of Dr. Sullivan, who unfortunately is at the conference, I really want to say that we are all on board with the initiative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say one thing about our friends at Northwell? So I bought 2 books, one from Mr. Singleton and one from Michael Dowling, who is the head of Northwell, because in the book, when Dr. Farrell talks about healthcare in America, he referenced that there are 2 institutions, I think maybe the only 2 that, or maybe they're the 2 most prominent, that focus on exclusively men's health, and one was NYU and one I think was in Cleveland.
That's right.
And I sent the book to Mr. Dowling and said, I know you're busy and it's a fascinating read, but by the way, blah, 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 blah. He sent me a note back and said, we are looking at developing a men's center, which I think is just absolutely fantastic, because some of the health data and realities are really troubling as well. Who else had a hand up? Anyone else? Yes.